Hello, my name is Dylan O'Shea. I am from Martinez, California, a small town in the Bay Area. I was a sociology major and I graduated in 2019. What I think that was unique about the sociology major was how broad and applicable it was to so many other fields of study. Before I came to UCLA, I was a transfer student. I came in 2017 from Skyline College in the Bay Area. And it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do. I explored communication, psychology, and I felt like sociology was where I found a lot of different fields of study kind of finding a home in one space so that it could apply to so many different things, and so many other fields of study also just met in the middle with sociology. I also thought was one thing I liked about sociology was how it took into account the people in the classroom. A lot of what we talked about was then applicable to students, and students could talk about their own personal experiences with certain issues. We talked about race and ethnicity, we talked about sexual orientation, gender, income inequality, and a lot of what guided our discussions and our studies was our own personal experiences, which I think makes what you're learning so much more special. You can take it with you. You can learn so much more from the people around you. So I learned just as much as from the person sitting to the left of me or someone across the room in my classrooms, just as much as I learned from my professor, which I think makes the learning so much more rich and valuable, and also helps you create a sense of community. Sociology was a great major because you made so many friends, you learned from the people around you. And it was just so diverse. There were so many ways that sociology bled into other studies, and I just found that so fascinating. One thing that I found challenging about it was also how broad it was. It was kind of a double-edged sword where it made figuring out what you wanted to do with sociology a little confusing because there were so many options and so many career paths that weren't clearly paved for you in a lot of ways. Where it was, because it was so broad, you had so many options and you're kind of overwhelmed with what you could do or what you wanted to, that it was hard to pinpoint it and make the path more straight and narrow for you to then have an end goal. And in terms of academia, I think the most challenging part of sociology was theory. It was a lot of reading and a lot of abstract thoughts, and a lot of sociological theory is quite older, so the way it was written was not necessarily written in ways that we are taught to read and write now. So it was very hard to pick apart the language that they used. But also the challenge made it interesting because it made you really not overthink, but it made you really want to analyze how you could apply theory to a case study. But then it was definitely a struggle and challenging. Definitely my theory classes were my most difficult because you have to take, for the sociology major, development, which is the history of sociological theory, and then a contemporary one where it's more evolved thought, and they kind of pick apart what was wrong with the theory of the past in certain ways, and then how that is then applicable now and how theory has evolved. I was in the public service and civic engagement floor my first year, and it at first definitely was helping guiding me to what I wanted to do with sociology, where at first I thought I wanted to do to then get a master's degree in public policy because I found that stuff so interesting. I love to write, I love to build something with my writing in a social lens. So I wanted to write about things that were happening in the world, or I wanted to then use my words and also sociological knowledge to then make change in certain aspects of our social world. At the time I thought it was public policy, but now I'm leaning towards more a public relations field. I want to work for a business and kind of shape and change how businesses are run in the world. I think COVID has really shown that aspect of how we run things is clearly very faulty, inequitable, and in need of dire change. So I feel public relations is kind of where I want to go for it. And the public service and civic engagement floor that I did our first year definitely helped guide me towards that way. It was very interactive. We had a lot of public thought and conversations that helped guide me towards that area. And it definitely, I think without that, living on that floor my first year at UCLA as a transfer student, I wouldn't have been able to figure out a lot of the things that I wanted to do or have that those resources as well. So I already work full time. I'm a retail manager. It's not what I want to do forever. It was just kind of the job that I had when I graduated, and then I moved forward with the company I was already with and kept that job. I do plan on going to grad school. I just wanted a couple years off. before I went back. I think academia sometimes is very exhausting and all-encompassing. And so when I graduated, I really just needed to save money for grad school. I wanted to be more prepared financially for when I finally was ready to like pay off those student loans that I will for sure have to pay after grad school. So I'm very thankful to have a job. I was able to like work or get paid throughout COVID, which was like the job security was very important to me. It helped me stay afloat. I didn't have to move home. But I definitely wanted to originally move from like the store that I worked at to the headquarters that our company was working for. And I had a job set up, but then COVID kind of changed that path. And then it kind of made me realize like maybe I should go to grad school sooner than later. So I plan on, instead of like searching for a new job right now, staying with the company that I'm with, but then I'm planning on applying to grad schools in a couple months and taking the GRE. And the programs I'm applying under are public relations. I mentioned that earlier. And I think public relations is like where I want to see change. As someone who's a customer service worker, even though I'm a manager, I still do a lot of customer servicing with what I do every day. And I think that people who work in stores really need more help from the people above them. I think that there's a lot of change that needs to be made. And I think public relations is where I want to go with that. And I want to work towards making customer service workers, they need better pay. We need more support. And I think that one thing that I have struggled with recently is that I don't get to make as many choices of how our business is run that I'd like to, especially because as a service worker, someone who works in the store, someone who interacts with customers and the public all the time, I think that people who do that work should have the right and the communication to then choose how they get to work. I think it's very strange that how people up in the top levels of a company can then say like, oh, this is how you should run your store during COVID, and this is like what we expect of you, when they're not actually communicating with people in those, or like, what do you need support with? What do you think is like easy for you to do, and what is not feasible right now for you? And so I think that's what I wanted to do with public relations, is kind of change up the communication ladder between the company and then those working for the company, like on a store level. Really make that dialogue an equal standing, have it be a conversation, not a command from the top down. They should be meeting in between and having dialogue. I want that work to change how people are doing in the workforce. There's a lot of things that need to be changed. I think one of the strongest advice that I have for anyone considering sociology is to explore minors. I think that because sociology, I mentioned so earlier, so broad, which makes it so intriguing and also so applicable to so many things, and definitely helps guide discussion, and it helps you relate it to if you're taking any of your general education courses. That definitely helps shape a lot of that and almost bridges the gap between your major and other classes you have to take. But I think that having either one or two minors is really easy with the sociology major. The sociology major, you can sometimes graduate in 3 years. So if you are not a transfer student, I highly recommend, and even as a transfer student, exploring majors once you come in, exploring minors when you come into UCLA, because there's so many things that can help you more solidify what you want to do with sociology. And there's a lot of like interesting minors at UCLA that are pretty easy to then put into your schedule along with sociology. And then definitely take elective classes for it. Like, I think, like I mentioned earlier, how you could graduate with 3 years for sociology. I don't think that learning ever expires. Like, if you have the time to just take a class that won't even get you towards your major within sociology because it sounds interesting, take it. I did that because I had like space to fill. And I think that just taking your time with your education is just as important. And if, of course, finances is a really big thing with taking a 4th year if you don't have to. But if you can, I think that taking more diverse classes within your own major may be something that you think you know about already. Like, oh, that class sounds like something that's common sense. Like, it usually is not going to be. You're going to learn just as much. So the 2 things that I recommend are taking your time with it and expanding what you think you already know into maybe just being open to new ideas and learning something that you think you might already know. You'll be surprised. And also exploring minors. I think it's a major that definitely appreciates a minor, but also I think encourages it. It encourages you to expand beyond what you're learning as well. So those are the 2 pieces of advice that I have.